Hello, beautiful people. In this guide, I will go over every single aircraft in the Japanese bomber tech tree, give general stats about them all, combined with my own remarks. Hope you enjoy!
This video will be the first in a planned series. I'm going to make guide videos on all prop bombers from every nation in War Thunder, except the Chinese one, since that is basically just copy-paste from other nations. Once all the prop bombers are covered, I intend to make a video on all jet bombers, hopefully, but that's not certain yet. I can fit them all into a single video. All the aircraft will be covered in the following manner. I will start out with a couple of remarks, then there will be a pro and con section. Afterwards I will give a short description of the bombload, followed by a description of the defensive armament, and lastly there will be a section with some gameplay footage including some more remarks and tidbits. Generally, the aircraft in the Japanese bomber tree can be described as nimble with poor bombload overall. Most of the time, the Japanese bombers have poor defensive armament, but in between there's a bomber which can really put up a fight. Contrary to popular belief, all bombers have self-sealing fuel tanks. Armor protection is generally hit and miss between the different bomber models. And all but the last heavy bomber are cheap to repair, with the most expensive normal bomber costing only 8,988 civilians to fully repair. So first on the list we have the little Japanese hydroplane F1M2. I've always had this thing for hydroplanes. I don't think it's sexual, but maybe I should work on finding out. This little guy sits at 1.0 and it's a hydroplane biplane combo. You have of course a pilot and a rear gunner. You only have a couple of light machine guns offensively and a single light machine gun defensively. And the only bomb load you can carry is two 60 kilogram bombs. So putting this in the bomber tree is kind of, I don't know, it's a little stretch, but yeah, it can drop bombs. You don't have a bombing sight as such, but you get the dive bombing aiming sight, just like you have on the D3A1, and I made a video specifically on how to use that bombing sight. If you wish to watch that one, here it is, right up there in the corner. It's super quick to spit out, and I think you should do it just since you want to play bombers and unlocking it anyhow. It only takes a couple of ARB missions to get it unlocked. Just drop down from your initial bomb altitude, do some strafing on ground targets and drop your single bomb load. I will say one thing though, be a little mindful when you're dropping from altitude, since past 450 or so, there's a pretty good chance that you'll rip off the ponton sitting under your wings. But on the other hand, if you manage to rip off both of them, you will actually get better flight characteristics, since there will be less drag on the plane itself. I don't suggest that you go after the bases with your puny bomb load, instead go strafing with your light machine guns. Drop your bomb load on some vehicles or some fortifications or something, and do that a couple of times combined with maybe getting assist or a kill on some other enemy fighter. And after a couple of missions you have a fully spaded F1M2 Japanese bomber. Sort of. Yeah, let's say that. So the first proper bomber for the Japanese is this one, the Mitsubishi Ki-21-1A, and it's a great little bomber. So there's a lot of pros for this plane. You can fly over 400 km an hour. It's only when you get to speeds around 500 you need to look out. It is incredibly maneuverable, and you have a turn time empty with only 14 seconds once it's fully spaded. And even with the full bomb load, the turn time is 16.5 seconds. And that tight turn radius will surprise a lot of fighters trying to get a kill on you. You can actually pretty quickly get on a fighter's tail and then just stay behind them, waiting for a friendly fighter to take over, or maybe hope that they'll get so nervous that they do a pilot error and end up eating the ground. The only real con I can think about is how the forward-facing defensive machine gun works, but other than that I would have loved if this plane would have been equipped with a couple of forward-facing machine guns. Because of how agile this aircraft is, once you have dropped your bombs, you could easily go either bomber hunting or even fighter hunting with this aircraft. Taking a look at the bomb loads on the Key 21, you have a lot of options. You can either go with 20 50 kilogram bombs, 10 100 kilogram bombs, 4 250 kilogram bombs, or 2 500 kilogram bombs. So there is a party mix for most situations. Defensively, you have 2 machine guns in a twin mod firing directly behind and upwards. Then you have 1 single machine gun firing behind you and downwards. And the last defensive armament, which is actually not defensive but more offensive of nature, since you cannot use this machine gun firing forward and upwards. So you can only use this machine gun offensively against anything that you're flying over already. And if you look at the angle of the machine gun, that means you can only fire at something that is pretty close to you, so you need to be super fast switching from the pilot view to the gunner view in order to use it at all. Spading the Key 21 is super easy. Just go to ARB and either kill a couple of bases with your 100 or 50 kilogram bombs, or go hunting for some ground targets. Now if you want to kill the light pillboxes, which is the higher value target, I would suggest use the 100 kilogram bombs. It's easier to kill them with those bombs, and sometimes you need multiple hits with the 50 kilogram bombs in order to score a kill on the pillboxes. In ground RB, like you see here, I would either go for the 10 100 kilogram bombs, or the 4 250s, or even the 2 500s. If you're somewhat certain in your aiming abilities, I would go for the 10 100s. It's still enough to kill a tank, but of course it's not easy to survive in a longer period of time, especially in a bomber ground RB. So in that case, you can go for the 4 250 kilogram bombs, or the 2 500 kilogram bombs. It's a bigger bang for the buck, and you don't need to be nearly as precise with the aiming as with the 100 kilogram bombs. Next on the list we have a couple of very large hydroplanes. We're starting out with the H6K4 sitting at battle rating 1.7. Personally, I think this is one of the most beautifully modeled planes in game. They have managed to put in a lot of details making this model, and it's just a pleasure to look at. Playing this aircraft though, it's a bit of a dog. Some of the pros for this aircraft: it's pretty to look at. Yep. It has a nice number of defensive armaments, including a rearward facing 20mm cannon, and you don't really see 20mm cannons otherwise at this low BR in a defensive role. And if the baddies are attacking you from behind and from above, you can greet them with up to 4 guns firing at them at the same time. If you manage to survive the whole ordeal and getting to bomb a base or two, a nice thing is that you don't really have an undercarriage on this plane, so you're landing on the belly and on the pontons. And while you're scraping along the runway, it only takes you a few seconds to get from 180 km an hour to 0. It's very, very fast to stop. And when you have fully repaired and rearmed, you're actually starting mid-air over the base, so you don't have to take off with the plane, and that will save you some time, and you're getting a boost in speed and altitude right off the bat. And be thankful, because you need all the help you can get. One last pro, and that is just me personally. I really like this guy. I think it's a beautiful plane just to look at. It's not very good in its bomber role, and it's kind of difficult to play, but I have a tendency to like playing underdog planes and tanks just like this. Some of the cons for this plane: it's pretty slow, about 325 km an hour once it's baited. It will of course pick up speed in a dive, but again you need to be careful not getting too fast or you'll rip off the pontons under the wings or the wings themselves. The stat sheet says that it has a turn time of 22.6 seconds, and I have no idea how they're getting that number. In my opinion, the turn time is about half the size of the island Okinawa, and you really need to find a sweet spot when we're talking about speed and flaps in order to get down to the stated numbers. And one more thing about the flight characteristics: it's very slow and lumbering trying to land it, and often you have trouble actually getting down from altitude and heading towards your base. The bombload it can carry is pretty underwhelming, and they are all external. It does not have an internal bomb bay. Bombload wise, it looks impressive, but it's really not. The best option here is actually the one you get initially, using the 12 60 kg bombs. The problem is that you're dropping bombs simultaneously both from the left and the right wing station, but that also means that for the majority of the bomb drops you only get a single one. The biggest bombs you can drop are 800 kilograms. As you can see, you have two options. That's because one of the 800 kilogram bombs are meant to penetrate the top of ships, and that's an AP bomb, and it only has about 40 kilograms worth of TNT. The other regular 800 kilogram bomb though has a TNT equivalent of around 430 kilograms. And talking about destroying floaty things, you of course also have access to a couple of torpedoes. Defensively covering your rear is a 20mm Type 99 Model 1 cannon. The turret unfortunately has poor gun depression, so you have issues with engaging something that's below and to the rear. You simply cannot depress the gun enough. The cannon also has a very low rate of fire, so it's kind of difficult to hit with because you're not really putting out that many shells. But again, once you hit with one shell, it's enough to kill basically any plane. Down the back of the plane you find this cluster of 3 machine guns. Now I have some remarks about the Type 92 light machine gun. For aircraft use, this is definitely the worst machine gun you can get. It has a very low rate of fire, only 600 rounds a minute, whereas some German defensive machine guns easily have twice the rate of fire. Build wise, either use the default build, which has some incendiary bullets in it, or use the APT build, which contains a lot of tracer bullets, so maybe you can scare off the fighters attacking you. Covering the front of the plane is a single forward-facing light machine gun, but as you can see here, even the third turret that sits along the back of the plane can also help covering the entire arc of fire that the most forward-facing machine gun has. And those two turrets combined can also cover the entire left, top and right side of the aircraft. So in my opinion, Big Boy is best used what I'm using it for right now, to destroy bases with, using the 12 60 kg bombs. Of course you could also go low and be adventurous and use this guy as a gunship, strafing ground targets and trying to kill all the fighters that are definitely going to be attracted to you. I would say the positive aspect of that approach is that you'll have your unprotected underside covered, but you'll have nowhere to run and just need to slug it out. So if you hit the right BR, the 12 60 kg bombs are enough to destroy 2 bases. So this CW21 chasing me is already hitting me over 1 kilometer away, and that's of course because I'm pretty damn huge and slow, so it's actually easy pickings. I hope you can see here, like I said earlier, the 20mm cannon, although it's effective once you hit, the cannon has a very low rate of fire and the muzzle velocity is not very impressive. But once and if you hit the guy, 1 or 2 hits should be enough to either kill the plane or at least get some crits on it, and thereby hopefully make the plane turn away and make the pilot reevaluate his choices in life. So a quick pro and con with not having an undercarriage: so you can land super fast on your belly, but on the other hand, you cannot J out and just change your bombload option or even leave the match, because once you have repaired, you are starting mid-air, and if you J out, you're only going to lose your aircraft. Okay, so before we continue, I have a couple of remarks here. So I don't understand how they are laying out or the layout of the Japanese tree is when you're talking about aircraft. See, the Ki 32 is actually a proper light bomber which has the bombing site and an internal bomb bay. So why is the F1M2 not either over here in the naval tree, or why are those two guys not switching places? This is a proper bomber, this is definitely not. Do that, Gaijin, and it will help out my OCD a great deal. And one more thing right here, as you can see, the two flying boats here are grouped together. So, and then for some reason 1.7, 3.3, and then it jumps down again to 2.7 and 3.0 and 3.3. I do understand why they grouped them together, but if you look at the continuation, it doesn't really make sense. Okay, back to the show. The pinnacle of Japanese long-range bomber slash hydroplane slash torpedo bomber is this guy, the H8K2. There is an H8K3 variant, but that one is a premium vehicle. And I can quickly mention the differences between the two models. The premium model has retractable pontons, and that gives it about an 80 km/h speed increase and a slightly better climb, but otherwise they are identical. The last difference has nothing to do with the flight performance, but on the premium model, the 20mm cannons have like 500 more rounds of ammo compared to the one in the regular tree. And of course it's a premium, so you're getting the premium bonuses. So I bet you thought that the H6K4 was a large target. Well, this one is even bigger. And if you want to taunt the enemy trying to shoot you down, then you can unlock the green camo like I have here, and thereby show them the huge red sun symbol on the side of the fuselage, all in glorious contrast. And in case you were wondering, I of course really like this guy too. The pros for this plane: it's fast, surprisingly so. Top speed is 474 km/h without the bomb load causing extra drag and weight. With the bomb load it's 460 km/h, and that is still quite fast for this flying hentai manga comic book shop. Good defensive armaments, you basically can cover all angles of attack with either a light machine gun or 20mm cannon. And just like all other hydroplanes, you can use this aircraft to capture bases with in naval battles. And some of the cons for this guy: you're a huge target. I guess that's self-explanatory, but I can expand a little on that. The size of the aircraft means that it limits you to high altitude bombing, well, in case you want to survive, of course. You can try to use all the 20mm turrets as a gunship instead, and attacking ground targets and enemy planes, but your life expectancy is pretty low then. But then again, that can be super fun as well. And of course in naval battles you can use this aircraft to carry some torpedoes to try sink some larger vessels. And once again here you have a very limited bomb load, and it's also external. So this actually means that at this PR you can basically only kill one base, and then you need to head home to resupply. The last con I will mention: it has a very weak, big and exposed underside, and on top of that a large part of the fuselage is full of fuel tanks. So there's a pretty good chance if attacked from below you're going to get hit in the fuel tanks and set off fire. And like many other bombers, it does not have a ventral turret, but of course in this instance it's mainly because it's a hydroplane. And it would really suck being that gunner who first got drowned before he got shot. Oh, and then burned, of course. Looking at the bomb load, and as I said before, it's not very impressive. You can either use 16 60 kg bombs, 2 800 kg bombs, and one of them is again an AP with only 40 kg worth of TNT. And lastly, the best bomb load, 8 250 kg bombs. Now even at the plane's own BR 3.3, you don't even have enough TNT content in the 16 60 kg bombs to destroy an entire base. And in the case of the 250 kg bombs, in order to destroy a base at 3.3, you would need 5 of the 8 250 kg bombs, and then you have 3 to spare to drop on another base just to maximize the kilograms of TNT you can drop. And once again, you have also access to drop a couple of torpedoes. Covering the rear is this 20mm cannon, but unlike the other hydroplane, This 20mm cannon has a vertical guidance of 45 degrees, so this means it's much better suited to defend from planes attacking you from behind and below. And this time the gun is protected with some 20mm armor plates, so you can see just below the gun. Another light machine gun covering the rear is this position, and he's able to defend from attacking aircraft that are attacking from below the 45 degrees that the 20mm cannon can cover. Next we have the dorsal turret, also with a 20mm cannon, and he can rotate the turret 180 degrees, covering the left, right and the back of the plane. Here we have the waist gunner position, again with a 20mm cannon, and he has a pretty good vertical and horizontal guidance. Tucked underneath the wings in this super secret gun position is yet another light machine gun. It looks super uncomfortable and I don't want his job. Right behind the pilot in the cockpit are two cheek gun positions, each covered by a light machine gun. Last but not least, the front is also covered by a 20mm cannon. And this cannon also has a vertical guidance of 45 degrees, so it's much more effective in its role than the previous hydroplane's forward-facing light machine gun. I started diving towards the ocean pretty steeply because I was trying to get the pontons to rip off, and they did around 540 km an hour. It's just a little trick you can use in order to improve your flight characteristics. Normally I always use bombs, but since this is one of the few maps where there's actually shipping involved, I thought I would try give it a go and use torpedoes. For some reason I thought I would release the torpedoes with the same key as I used to release rockets with, but that was of course not the case, and I clicked like a madman on number 3 key, which is my bomb release key right after, so I released both torpedoes instead of just one of them. I actually remember that only one torpedo would be enough to kill a light cruiser, but well, better safe than sorry. So this is one of those missions where I got lucky. I saw that there were 3 Heinkel 111s underneath me, and that is a pretty rare sight. And I've played the Heinkels a lot, so I know they have a pretty crappy defensive capability behind them. So I really wanted just to get some bombs on the first target, so I thought, well, get rid of the bombs, let's just drop all of them on at least one base, so at least I would get some points for that in case my little stunt against the Heinkels would fail. So I singled one of them out and he was heading towards our main airfield. We had a couple of planes on the airfield, but I wasn't really sure if they were actually landing or taking off. I was really just waiting to see if the bomber would do anything that would indicate that he had dropped the bombs or not. And he started shooting at me, so I kind of thought that, okay, he dropped them, and I was kind of nervous that we would lose a couple of aircraft because he timed it pretty good. But I never saw the impact because I was concentrating on seeing if I could get a bomber versus bomber kill. So I opened up around 1 kilometer, aiming a little higher, and you can see here the impacts of my 20mm cannon rounds. And I'm using the air target spell, and that only uses high explosive shells. And yep, I actually managed to get a kill shot on the pilot, knocking him out, and that was a pretty sweet win. One of the rare ones, but it was incredible fun, and the 20mm forward facing cannon makes this kind of thing possible. Here we have the Japanese G4M1 by the allied called Betty, sitting at battle rating 2.7. I was reading up upon this bomber and noticed that Gaijin has kind of mixed and matched different bomber models into the one we see here in the game. Originally the G4M1 did not have self-sealing fuel tanks, it came only with later models, but they decided to add it in the game, and not that I'm complaining, but it's not accurate. Another thing that's a little off is that the rear gunner actually had added armor protection in the G4M1, but that is omitted, and I guess that's a trade-off with self-sealing fuel tanks. But in the end, I probably prefer the way Gaijin did it, and I'd rather have a self-sealing fuel tanks than armor protection for the rear gunner. Some of the pros for the Betty Bomber: it has a good speed with 450 km an hour, and you can actually put it into a dive and not worry about the wings until you reach about 550 km an hour. It's also pretty agile. The stat sheet set a turn radius of 32 seconds, I actually think it's lower than that, and it also has a full set of flaps, which means you also get access to combat flaps. As you can see, the fuselage of the Betty Bomber is kind of formed like a cigar, and that was also a nickname the Japanese pilots gave it, and that means that from an attacking fighter's perspective, you are actually a pretty small target if attacked from behind. If the stat sheet is correct, then the rear gunner's 20mm cannon has 1000 rounds of ammo, and that is a buttload. In all other bombers it's between 270 and maybe 400 rounds. Of course you still need to switch out the drums, but holy crap, you can go absolutely nuts with that number of shells. Some of the cons for the G4M1: so except for the 20mm cannon that the rear gunner has, the only other offensive armaments are only the very poor Type 92 light machine gun, and if not attacked from behind, you have very poor defensive capabilities. While a lot of other bombers at this battle rating does have some kind of armor protection for the pilots and some gunners, the G4M1 has none, and that was mainly because it was built for speed and range and not really caring about the cruise protection. Well, not really not caring, but it was just part of their design philosophy. It was all about performance. And just like the previous bombers, the Betty Bomber suffers from a poor bomb load. And once again we have the sad side looking at the bomb bay. It's very underwhelming. You have access to 12 60kg bombs, 2 different 800kg bombs, again one with an AP warhead and one regular 800kg bomb, and 2 250kg bombs. Now there's about 10 kilograms difference in the TNT of those two 250kg bombs, and the top one is the one that has the most TNT in it, so don't even bother about the one that is colored green here. There's also the option to drop a single 500kg bomb, and once again a torpedo. Now with a regular 800kg bomb you can just about kill a base at your own BR. Same goes with the 2 bombloads with the 4 250kg bombs. But if you find yourself in a match with just a slightly higher BR than your own, then there's a big chance that you won't even be able to kill a single base by yourself. The rear of the aircraft is protected by Old Faithful, the Type 99 20mm cannon. Unfortunately we are back to a pretty bad vertical guidance with only plus and minus 30 degrees. The sides are protected with a waist gunner, again only using the old Type 92 machine gun. Fortunately they now have almost twice the ammo count of what previous bombers had. Forward towards the cockpits is the dorsal gun, using yet another light machine gun, but this time you can actually elevate 45 degrees, so what the 20mm cannon cannot cover, this light machine gun can. Aiming forward but not covering forward is the last of the light machine guns. And just like the Key 21, but not as bad though, this gun cannot elevate anything but 5 degrees, so you cannot use it against an enemy threat directly in front of you. Again, this is more aimed towards covering ground targets that you're basically over already, or with any luck an enemy aircraft flying below and in front of you. So with this bomber having no armor at all, but it being fast, I suggest that instead of staying at altitude or climbing, you should actually dive towards the target, pick up as much speed as you can without ripping off your wings, and then do a low level bomb drop on a base or some ground targets. And that is your best option in order to be able to reach your base again to rearm. Staying low and flying as fast as you can is the best way of survival with this kind of bomber. And if the enemy pilot has not upped the crew skill that's called keen vision, you will be even harder to detect from above. A quick tip here that goes both for bombers and fighters if you're somebody on your tail. Don't do any great movements, just some subtle movements in order to making overshoot or miss you, since if you do any violent movements, the only thing that will happen is that you're going to lose speed, and the loss of speed will only mean that the baddie will get even closer to you for a better and more precise shot. And this is another break from the regular programming. Now try to look at this. The next bomber I will cover is the Key 49. As you can see here, we have 4 different models ranging from 3.0 to 3.7. The 3.0 version of the aircraft is different from the other 3 in that it has weaker engines. All 4 have the same bomb load, and the only difference between all of the 4 models is the defensive armament. I'm going to cover the very last bomber sitting at 3.7, and there's even a mistake here. There should be a difference between the Key 49 2B and the Key 49 2B late, but in game they are identical. Now the difference should be that the late model should have a different exhaust system, making the late model a little faster, and I believe the 2-way light machine guns should be switched out with heavy machine guns. If you guys know anything about it, please let me know in the comment section. And by the way, if you guys have watched so much of this video already, do me a favor and either subscribe or give it a like. But wait, there's more. Now I suggest instead of having 4 versions of the same plane with only 0.7 BRs difference, Gaijin should have dropped the very first version of the Key 49 and instead given us the improved version of the Betty bomber, the G4M3. That version had armor protection and an entire new tail gunner's compartment, and they even had 20mm cannons in the waist gunner positions instead of the puny Type 92 machine gun. They could even put the G4M3 at 3.0 instead of the first G49, and I think that would give the Japanese bomber tree a little more variation, with very little effort since the planes are already there looking at us. So here we have the top model of the Key 49s, the Key 49 2B late. To be late, that's kind of funny, but it's actually not true when it comes to this plane. So I think the Key 49 family of bombers are kind of a mixed bag, so I'm gonna dive right into the pros and cons. Some of the pros. It's pretty fast, so you can dive to around, I would say, close to 600 km an hour without having to worry about the wings ripping. Past 600, you do need to worry. So the Key 49 family of bombers is the first that really has a decent amount of armor protection for the crew. Although not all gunners are protected, there's a bunch of 12.5mm armor plates spread out throughout the airplane, and even the pilot is protected with some 68mm thick bulletproof glass just in front of him. The defensive armament has also got an upgrade compared to the previous bombers, and gun is the Type 92 very slow firing light machine gun. Some of the cons. It has pretty mediocre flight characteristics. And I don't know if it's the supposed weight of the armor plating or whatever, but it does not perform as well as the size would indicate. Especially at lower speeds whenever you're going slow and low in order to hit some, let's say, pillboxes. It's really visible once you're in the bomb site and want to get that precision drop on a pillbox. And whenever you try to maneuver the plane in order to get the crosshairs on it, it's easy to overcorrect because once you start fiddling with the controls, it's very slow to react, and then of course you overcorrect it because it's so slow, and then you're kind of just oscillating back and forth. Super annoying. The placement of the 20mm cannon is kind of odd, and you cannot use it to defend directly from attacks from behind the aircraft. And continuing the tradition, the Key 49 has a very poor bomb load. The last con is of course irrelevant if you're a poor bomber pilot and get shot down all the time, but the lowering of the landing gear is very slow, and it's just something that you need to keep in mind whenever you return to the airfield. Otherwise you'll just end up with a bigger repair bill, because you're going to rip off your not fully extended landing gear, crash land onto the airstrip, and damaging the underside of the aircraft alongside with the engines and so forth. As you can see here, the bomb load is very underwhelming. You can carry a single 500 kg bomb, 12 50 kg bombs, or the biggest bomb load, which consists of 4 250 kg bombs. That's about it. So with this small bomb load, I do not suggest that you go destroy bases, since, well, you can rarely actually destroy a base on your own. So on the Key 49 it's the first time you'll see a heavy machine gun on a Japanese bomber. If you look closely at the Ho 104, it kind of looks very similar to American 50 caliber Browning. Compared to the Browning, this Japanese machine gun has a higher rate of fire with 900 rounds a minute. However, in order to get to this higher rate of fire, the Japanese use a lighter cartridge. So again, in order to compensate for that, the Japanese heavy machine guns can actually use high explosive ammunition. So you get a higher rate of fire, access to high explosive ammunition, but you get much less armor penetration. And in order to use the high explosive ammunition, you should always use the universal build, especially when you're fighting other aircraft. So that's nice and good, but unfortunately on this particular aircraft, with this particular rear gunner, the vertical guidance is only minus 10 degrees, and that is pretty damn awful. So looking at the waist gunners, instead of the very poor Type 92, they instead use a much faster firing Type 89 light machine gun. The ammunition however is the same, so just go with the default build, because that contains some incendiary bullets. So this gunner's position looks pretty uncomfortable. He is however using one of the newer heavy machine guns, so good for him. Unfortunately for him and you, the vertical guidance of this gun position is only minus 5 degrees. So it's pretty unfortunate that this gun position is even needed. It would have been much better if the rear gunner would have way more vertical guidance on his gun. In this dorsal position, we unfortunately have a 20mm cannon, but the good thing is, it's a new cannon. Compared to the older Type 99, this new Ho 1 cannon has a slightly lower rate of fire, but a much higher muzzle velocity. And in my book that is definitely a win, because that means it's much easier to aim with, you don't need so much lead, and everybody's happy. Of course, except for the pilots on the receiving end. I'm sure the Japanese had a good reason to place the 20mm cannon in the dorsal turret, but for War Thunder specifically, we would have been much better off if the 20mm cannon was at the rear gunner's position. Last but not least, the nose gunner also has a new gun and much better vertical and horizontal aiming. So with these changes, this time the nose gunner can actually attack somebody going head on against you. And with the new and improved vertical guidance of minus 25 degrees, you can actually use the nose gunner to strafe ground targets with. A problem amongst bombers, including this Key 49, is right here. A single well-placed hit with a 20mm shell with explosive filler can potentially kill all 4 gunners. A good burst from a heavy machine gun or even a rifle caliber machine gun can also do the trick. There's really nothing you can do about it, I just wanted to mention it. So it's not that you can't use the Key 49 to kill bases with, but you do need to look at the statistics and see what kind of BR you are up against. For this particular match, it was actually at my own BR 3.7. And at my own BR and lower, you can just about kill a base, but not more than that. Even the mighty snail had to help me with the last couple of percentages in order to destroy the base. All hail the snail. So on smaller maps, the Key 49 is fast enough that you can deliver the bombs to the base and then get the hell out of there, hopefully returning to the base, rearm, and then head out to kill some ground targets. But if you're in a match where the BR is higher than your own, I would just go ground pounding. Lastly, I would not recommend the Key 49 for ground RB. I don't think that the maneuverability is good enough. Instead, use style bombers like the D4Y3 Co, or even better the B7A2 sitting at 4.0. They're much smaller and more nimble, have offensive armament, and can basically carry the same bomb load as the Key 49. This is one of my favorite medium bombers in War Thunder, the Key 67-1 Otsu, and Otsu meaning second model or version. I had never been shot down delivering a bomb load to a base in this bomber. It's just too fast to be caught at its battle rating. In the game you have access to two versions of the Key 67. At 4.0 you find the Key 67-1 Co and the second model Otsu at 4.3. Now the Co and the Otsu model are identical except for one improvement, that is a pretty nice one. The rear gunner in the Otsu model has two heavy machine guns to play with instead of only one in the Co model, and that is pretty nice. There is actually a third version of the Key 67, but you don't find that in the bomber tree. Instead, you need to go to the ground attack interceptor tree and look for the Key 109 sitting at 2.3. It's the same type of bomber, but without any bomb bay, and they have removed all but one defensive armament. Instead, they have placed a 75mm anti-tank gun in the nose. And it's absolutely deadly at 2.3 against bombers and of course tanks. I have previously made a video about it and you should go check it out if you want to. I will put down a link in the description and also right up there in the corner. So go check it out after you finished watching this video, of course, not before, mind you. Some of the pros for the Key 67. It's very fast for the battle rating. If careful, you can reach speeds just over 650 km an hour in a shallow dive without triggering the speed warning. And it's so fast that fighters often have difficulty catching you, even when you're heading back to the base to get another bomb blow. And I've had plenty of fighters just give up catching me. Excellent flight characteristics. So if you compare the Key 67 to the Key 49, it's almost like playing a fighter plane compared to that other aircraft. It's very nimble and responsive at basically all speeds. And even at lower speeds where the Key 49 struggles so much, the Key 67 is very easy and handles just beautifully. Good defensive armament. So gone is any light machine gun, and the Key 67 is equipped with heavy machine guns and a 20mm cannon. If you're a bad bomber pilot that does not know how to survive dropping bombs and return to base, just skip this one. Now the Key 67 is very easy to land, and that is due to good low speed behavior and the landing gear dropping very fast. That actually drops faster than some fighters. When you hit the landing gear key, it will fully extend in 2 to 3 seconds. And again, that's a stark contrast to the Key 49. There are even more pros I could mention, but I'll spread them out across the other segments on this bomber. And some of the cons for the Key 67. Poor bomb capacity. Now with all the speed and maneuverability, something has to suffer. But even though it's minimalistic, it's still better than the Key 49. Weak armor protection overall, but it has some surprises. And again, this is the price you pay for speed and maneuverability. The Key 49 has much better overall armor protection for the crew. In the Key 67 you only get a couple of armor plates protecting the dorsal gunner and the rear gunner. But the pilots here have much better protection compared to the Key 49. Both pilots are protected with a 70mm bulletproof glass in front of them. It is not just a tiny piece of glass, but all of the cockpit glass in front of them is bulletproof. They also have a 50mm plate protecting their backs, and even a large plate protecting their legs from frontal attacks. So going to flight school and not aerial gunnery school definitely paid off in that regard. And here we have a look at the bomb bay. Now, it doesn't look very impressive, but for this type of aircraft I actually think the bomb load is pretty okay. You can either do 15 50 kilogram bombs, 8 100 kilogram bombs, 3 250 kilogram bombs, a single 500 kilogram bomb, or a torpedo. And once again, you can just about kill a single base by yourself at your own BR, and that's about it. But I'll come back to what I actually like to do with this kind of bomb load later. So this is the first time we are seeing a heavy machine gun, the Ho 104, in a dual mount setup. So the turret on the Key 67 is a huge upgrade from the turret on the Key 49 in every respect. You're getting almost 3 times the ammunition count, 1 more heavy machine gun, and basically twice the horizontal and vertical guidance with plus minus 45 degrees. Because of the excellent vertical guidance of this turret, gone is that uncomfortable looking ventral turret that previous bombers had. Compared to the previous bombers, except for the H8K2, the waist gunners on the Key 67 also has gotten an upgrade. Gone is the light machine gun, and here we also have heavy machine guns. Now the waist gunners have a trick up their sleeves, horizontal, and take note of this, minus 75 degrees, plus 40 degrees, and vertical guidance a very impressive plus minus 50 degrees. Take note of the rail system the heavy machine guns are attached to, and I will come back to that later. The dorsal turret on the Key 67 has gotten a huge upgrade in every respect compared to the one found on the Key 49. First off, it has received a new 20mm cannon, the Ho 5. And this 20mm cannon actually holds a record when we are talking about World War II. This is the fastest firing 20mm cannon you can find in the game. It can fire from 800 to 950 rounds a minute. And that is pretty insane. That is actually a lot faster than most heavy machine guns in the game. And once upgraded, the Ho 5 is actually very accurate, and it can also fire a particularly nasty ammunition, the high explosive fragmentation incendiary round. So not only are you going to be blown up by this shell, you'll also be set on fire. The guidance for the turret is also very impressive. Horizontally is plus minus 110 degrees and vertically plus 60 degrees. And those numbers are almost 3 times higher than found on the Key 49. A very generous upgrade has also occurred for the nose turret. Horizontal guidance is a pretty amazing plus minus 180 degrees. And also vertical guidance is minus 60 and plus 90 degrees. So the movement of the front turret is almost unrestricted, which is pretty amazing. And the turret has achieved that by this strange looking but very effective rotating setup. And a quick note here. I'm pretty sure most people will not bother looking at the replay and go explore the external views of the aircraft like this. But personally, I get a kick out of finding these kind of almost hidden details on aircraft or vehicles in general like this. And I think Gaijin should be commended for implementing all these very interesting details. Remember what I said about the waist gunner's minus 75 degrees horizontal guidance? Try a look at this. So this is pretty amazing. It's pretty rare to see that the waist gunners can help defend the plane from attacks directly from the rear. One of the cool things about the Japanese torpedoes is that you can drop them at almost 500 kilometers an hour. They're pretty sturdy and they're also pretty fast, but anybody playing naval probably knows that. I didn't, since I don't play naval and I have limited experience with torpedoes in general, but they're fun to use. And here luckily we can see that, thank God, the Japanese bombers has gotten self-sealing fuel tanks. After having played some Japanese Zeros, which do not have self-sealing fuel tanks, I actually thought initially that none of the Japanese plane would have that, but of course all the key land-based models have, well, most of them anyhow, and luckily all the bombers have. I know of at least one Japanese bomber which should not have, but I guess Gaijin was generous for once, and thank you for that. So I think this is where the Key 67 really shines, just using the 8 100 kilogram bombs. You can use all the 50 kilogram bombs, but it's very difficult to kill a pillbox with them. You really need to hit the pillbox directly, while you can still miss just a tiny bit with the 100 kilogram bomb. It just has that tiny more TNT content. And for this mission, I remember I had gone out and killed a base with the first bombload and then returned. Most of the enemy fighters had been shot down at this point, and that's why I was brave enough to actually go into the middle of the map and just start ground pounding. So one of the things I talked about how maneuverable this plane is, I can demonstrate right here. So I was about to land, and I think I didn't even put down the landing gear. So I saw this yak up there, and the yak was just waiting until I had landed to try pounce on me. So of course I did not want to give him that pleasure, so I accelerated away instead. And then just combat flaps, and then takeoff flaps, and try to look at how maneuverable that thing is, even at lower speeds. So in this case, the maneuverability of the Key 67 definitely saved my butt. Here we have the first of the Japanese heavy bombers, the G5N1, sitting at 4.7. This guy is pretty awful, and let me explain why. The only option for playstyle you really have is to side climb and then bomb the bases and the airfield. And that's about it. What makes this heavy bomber particularly boring to play is not the climbing per se, but once you are at the optimal height, you are still very slow, and if you're caught up there, your defensive armament is severely lacking. So that means all your time spent climbing is almost a waste of time. Well, you're playing a game, so you're wasting your time anyhow, but there is a limit to the madness. Personally, I have never been shot down climbing or bombing with this plane, but the sheer thought of spending 10 minutes of flying back and the very painful re-entry into Earth orbit has made me jay out several times just to spare myself the anguish. Some of the pros for this plane, and yes, there are actually a couple of pros. You can work on perfecting your origami and bonsai skills, since you have plenty of time while side climbing. The G5N1 has the largest bomb load of any Japanese bomber. Congratulations. And you can whip 100% of the time and the engines will never overheat. Seriously, they don't even get yellow. And here's a few of the cons for this plane, and there are so many, I'm just gonna mention a few. I briefly mentioned that the plane is slow, but yeah, it's extremely slow. The stat sheet claims that the plane can fly 512 km an hour at optimal height. I've been up to optimal height several times with the 7600 meters. But I've only managed to get around 360 km an hour, and definitely not the 512 as it says. In fact, the only way you can reach 512 km an hour is when you dive towards the ground trying to end yourself. The bomber has very bad flight characteristics, it's super slow to turn, and the reaction time is found on a calendar. Poor defensive armament. And also sadly, we are back to the light machine guns here. There's two 20mm cannons, and then gone are the heavy machine guns, being replaced with older light machine guns. What? The F. Poor rate of climb. So you want to climb, but you also want to move forward, and trying to climb with around 10 degrees or close to it, you find out that the struggle is real. At that angle of attack, you can barely make 200 km an hour. Very poor armor protection. So you would think a big long-range bomber like this would have plenty of armor protection since the weight doesn't really matter that much. But no, none of the multiple gunners have any kind of protection whatsoever. The only protection you can find here are for the pilots. So their asses and their backs are protected with a plate each. So once again kids, go to flight school, do not attend aerial gunnery school. The bomb load is pretty impressive. You can either bring 4 800 kg bombs, 12 250 kg bombs, Ot-24 is 60 kilogram bombs, but again only use it for either base bombing or airfield bombing. And you can destroy more than one base with this large bomb load. So here we have Dave. Well, his dad was American and his mom was Japanese. Dave is bored out of his mind because there's nothing to do but sit and fiddle with his pretty rotating turret. Dave is also annoyed because he's using the same 20mm cannon as the one found on a hydroplane at 1.7. At least Dave can be happy that he has pretty decent horizontal and vertical guidance on his cannon. And yeah, that's a pun. The waist gunner with the back to us is annoyed with the waist gunner we are looking at because he forgot to bring the Saki. They are also annoyed that they don't have any heavy machine guns to play with, but instead they have this light machine gun. The only redeeming factor is that this is the fastest firing light machine guns that the Japanese have, but the Saki would still have made it bearable. Here we have the closest thing we can come to a ventral turret. It does not have a lot of guidance, but it still helps the rear gunner. But Hoshi here can still smirk a little, since he has 100 rounds more of ammo compared to the two waist gunners. The dorsal gunner is jealous of Dave because Dave has this fun and cool looking rotating turret to play with. He thinks about making some angry entries in his poetry book about it, and he consoles himself with the knowledge that he has more rounds for his 20mm cannon than Dave has. Up front we have Sato, and he is also super annoyed. Right after Chopsticks, he has a very common family name, and he has no seat, so he has to stand up doing the whole side climbing ordeal. But worst of all, he alone has to man 3 light machine guns, and they are all in a different position, and that has to give him back problems. If the pilot is not going to end it all and jay out, I hope Sato is going to see a chiropractor once they land. So I think in order to get the most out of this first heavy Japanese bomber, you should just climb and then go either base bombing or bomb the eventual airfield. Everything else is almost pointless and useless, especially because the G5N1 handles so poorly, and for the BR, all the 7.7mm machine guns don't really do a whole lot of damage. It does require a lot of patience, but of course sometimes you just want to log on to War Thunder, do your daily tasks and then log out again. And if you have the time and you sit with a cup of coffee or fiddle with your phone or tea or whatever you do, then this is definitely an option to get those done. And under the right circumstances, you can actually make a decent amount of silver lions in the process. With 570%, the G5N1 rewards you with the highest amount of silver lions of any of the Japanese bombers. If you're used to playing heavy bombers, I'm sure you know this, but I'm just going to mention it anyhow. Trying to force the heavy bomber into doing something it does not want to do will only make you frustrated, and it can just lead to a crash. Especially when you're talking about landing. So just give it plenty of time, turn off the engines, let it glide towards the airfield, and give it plenty of space so you can make a slow and steady turn in order to get properly lined up. This way you also avoid having to go around again, which can be super annoying with these big birds. And you can make returning to the airfield into a minigame itself by lining up correctly to the airfield and make a slow and steady descent, and see how nice and pretty a landing you can perform. So here we are, we made it to the very last bomber on the Japanese tree, the G8N1. And this is the big cheese, the honcho, the big enchilada, the big kahuna, and numero uno. And those colorful descriptions are definitely accurate in some regards and not so much in others. Even though a battle rating of 5.7 doesn't really sound that high, try compare that to the highest BR for the Italian bomber, and it definitely is. There's just a single bomber in the entire game that can surpass the G8N1 in defensive firepower, and that is the Russian Tu-4 sitting at 8.0. And the Tu-4 is basically just a copy-paste of the American B-29 with heavier guns and a bigger payload. So while this bomber's defensive capabilities is very impressive, its bomb load is the complete opposite. In fact, this bomber takes the Risley Award when it comes to bomb load for heavy bombers in the game. Even the last of the Italian bombers sitting at a Mega BR 3.7 can carry a larger bomb load than this guy. But let's get on to it. Some of the pros. Crazy defensive armament. This bomber has 6 20mm cannons in 3 turrets and 4 30mm heavy machine guns. So that is pretty nutty, but I'll get into more details about it later. Good armor protection for the crew. Throughout the bomber we find 13mm armor plates protecting most of the crew. And this is actually the only bomber in the whole Japanese tech tree that has armor protection for the waist gunners. Good flight characteristics. Compared to the G5N1, the G8N1 is basically a fighter plane. Of course it's still a heavy bomber, but you can definitely feel the difference. It also has a good rate of climb, and if you want to space climb, just put it in a 15 degrees climb and you can do that with about 250 km an hour. Fast. According to the stat sheet, the max speed is 512 km an hour, but you can squeeze out a little more speed than that, and with web you can get to around 540 km an hour in a straight line, and that is pretty fast. Another great thing is that the limits for the wings are an amazing 680 km an hour. In comparison, the max speed for the B-17's wings are just 512 km an hour. So when you have a bunch of fighters chasing you, like you will since you're this big orange bird, they really have to make an effort in order to catch you while you're blazing away with your 20mm cannons. Some of the cons for the G8N1. Awful bomb load. Yeah, it sucks. Expensive to fully repair. Once fully upgraded, this bomber will cost you 35,000 silver lines to replace. By most other nations' heavy bombers at this battle rating will only cost you 10,000 silver lines. And for many players this sadly needs to be taken into consideration. As mentioned before, this bomber has one of the worst bomb loads for a heavy bomber in the game, especially at this battle rating. You have very limited options to boot. You can either pick 18 60 kg bombs, 8 250 kg bombs, or the largest bomb load, 3 800 kg bombs. And with the 3 800 kg bombs you can just about kill a base at the bomber's on battle rating, and that's about it. But the saving grace is though that with this bomber's defensive armament and its speed, there's a high chance that you can actually deliver those bombs to the target and then return for more. Looking at the rear gunner's position and layout, you can definitely see where the Japanese got their inspiration. It looks almost identical to a B-17's rear gunner position. But compared to the B-17, this gunner has gotten a serious firepower upgrade. Instead of a couple 50 caliber Brownings, you find 2 20mm cannons. These cannons, the Type 99 Model 2 Mark 5s, are upgraded versions of the Type 99 Model 1. The cartridge itself has 40% more propellant compared to the older type, and the barrels are longer, and with those two changes combined, you now have a muzzle velocity of 750 meters a second compared to the older model's 600 meters a second. And that of course means that they're easier to aim with and you require less lead. Unfortunately, and this is a theme going for all turrets on this bomber, is that you have quite a low amount of ammo at your disposal. If you're out on a long mission, you do need to worry about your ammo count. So in general, wait until the baddies are within 1 kilometer before you open up. The rear gunner's horizontal and vertical guidance is not super impressive with only 30 degrees plus minus, but luckily both the ventral turret and the dorsal turret can help you defend against baddies coming from behind. So this is the first time we'll see the Type 2 30mm heavy machine gun in a bomber. It's actually a license-built version of the German MG131, but the Japanese did not use the electrical ignition that the Germans used because they thought it would not be reliable in the tropics. The Type 2 uses a light cartridge, so it has a pretty nutty rate of fire with 940 rounds a minute. The waist gunners have a pretty good horizontal and vertical guidance, and once again, unfortunately, they only have 300 rounds each for the heavy machine guns. Here in Upside Downtown we have the ventral turret, and again we find two 20mm cannons. Unfortunately, these cannons have even less ammo than the rear gunner. Here you only have access to 200 rounds of ammo. It's pretty sad since you as a heavy bomber are supposed to be pretty high up, and this turret would have a great opportunity to shoot at any bombers below you and fighters too, because this turret can shoot straight down, so minus 90 degrees, but again, with only 200 rounds of ammo you need to be careful. The dorsal turret has a great range of guidance. The horizontal guidance is plus minus 180 degrees and the vertical guidance is plus 85 degrees, so it can help defend the aircraft with great effect. Last but not least, we have the nose turret, and this turret is equipped with two Type 2 heavy machine guns. The horizontal and vertical guidance is okay for this turret, but not more than that. Unfortunately, and this is the worst part, you only get 200 rounds of ammo for each machine gun. So the best you can do in your G8N1 when it comes to bomb basing at your own BR is kind of 1.65 or 1.7 bases, and that's about it. And looking at the score screen on the tonnage drop, that's just shy over 1 ton. That's because the second bomb you drop on the first base is never going to do full damage. On the maps where there are 4 bases to destroy and where they require double the regular bomb load, you can only kill 1 base and then you have to return. As I mentioned before, you really don't have that much ammo for your 20mm cannons, so you have to be careful. And usually I wait until the enemy fighters are about 1 kilometer away until I open up. Of course, whenever I'm attacking other bombers or they're attacking me, I usually open up at maybe 1.5 or 2 kilometers. They're just bigger targets. With the premium account running, I earned about 30,000 silver lines from that match. So even though I lost the aircraft and lost the match, I almost broke even. This is my personal top 3 list of useful bombers from the tree. And funnily enough, my number 1 is actually the first real bomber in the tree. It can carry the same bomb load as a bomber sitting at 4.3 and even more actually. It is as nimble as a fighter and can even outperform fighters when we are talking about turn radius. And it's fast enough to be able to survive, let's say, Grounder being much higher tiers than its own. And last but not least, it is very cheap to repair, so it doesn't really matter. Number 2 on the list is the Key 67-1 Otsu, and even though it's not as overall useful as the Key 21, this is my personal favorite. It's very fast for the BR, can carry an okay, somewhat lighter bomb load, is very maneuverable, has a good armor protection for the pilots, and has a good defensive armament for the BR. Last but not least is the G8N1. I know it's very expensive to lose, and as a heavy bomber, it's actually very poor. But if you're getting good enough in your G8N1, you can end up earning civil lines instead of losing it every time you're taking this plane out. And you do this not by killing ground targets, but by killing enemy bombers and enemy fighters. And the bomber has such a great fun factor to me. And in my opinion, you will be just fine with only spading and using those 3 bombers. The rest of the bombers are fun and interesting to use, but if you want to be the most effective and save some silver lions in the process, you will be more than fine just using those 3 bombers. Besides the bombers in the regular tech tree, there's also 2 premium bombers. I briefly mentioned the H8K3, but there's also a captured US B-17 sitting at 4.7. Of the 2 premium bombers, the B-17 is definitely the one to get if you want to go that route. And compared to the lower rank of the premium H8K3, the captured B-17 sits at rank 4. The B-17 is of course more expensive than the H8K3, but with increased rank you will have researching many more aircraft. Well, and of course it's a pretty good bomber. As a supplement, I would recommend using some of the very good dive bombers. And one last remark, it doesn't really matter which bomber tickles your fancy, but if you find a couple of bombers that you really like, I suggest that you throw some civil lines after them and getting them up to expert. Those extra crew points really makes a big difference. Okay, that was it for this first bomber guide video. Please let me know in the comment section if you thought I got the format right or not. I know that the whole monotone voice is an issue for some, but when I'm concentrating it's my default go-to, but it's always a work in progress. And a big thank you to Izzy for making the voiceover for the intro. I can guarantee she will be back for more intros and other stuff in the future. I have added some links in the description below, both for other relevant videos on the channel, but also for more direct ways for you guys to support the channel if you wish to do so. Until next time, thank you for watching, and remember to deploy your die brakes. Have a good one.